Hi, Modern Mystic. A long time since we've spoken. I think it's a very interesting video. I saw Conference Reports reply to it first. I kind of will talk about both of them a little bit. Firstly, I think that these questions of do you have a thought and then a feeling, then an action, a calculation, then a feeling, then another thought, and then a feeling and an action. To me, those questions mistake what those distinctions are really about, because basically I think our human experience can be described as a series of perceptions, as a series of thoughts, or as a series of feelings, and those are all exactly the same phenomena being described, but just different perspectives, like whether you're talking about something more as a neutral image that's not particularly evocative, whether you're talking about the evocative feeling itself, such as a poetic thought that is very evocative, and that's what you characterize it with, or whether it's analytical. In reality, all of these things can be called feelings. Analytical feelings, for example, one of the most important things in intellectual pursuits is that aha moment, that eureka moment. Eureka, I found it. It's kind of emotional things. So I consider all thoughts like this. A feeling of hunger, a feeling of... Now, when we're talking about this, there's certain rhetorical problems, because if you were to say that, thinking about red, that's a thought, and thinking about blue, that's a feeling, or vice versa, might be better, considering red is considered such an emotional color. And I said, no, there's no difference. It's the same. They're both colors. They're both, these perceptive feelings. You might point out, oh, no, they're different. Red is different from blue. But, as feelings, no. And so, yeah, all of the feelings and thoughts, perceptions we have, they're all quite varied, and they go into different categories. But they all are feelings, a feeling of hunger. If you see red, that's a feeling of red. So all you have is this. So there's no, a thought and then a feeling. You had two feelings. You might call one a thought because it was more analytical. Call another one, an emotion because it was less analytical, and have all of your labels for these various feelings and thoughts and what you want to call them. But they're happening at the same time, and it was a feeling and a thought. There was a thinking aspect to it, and there's a feeling aspect to it. And it really is only about which part of cognition are you talking about. When you tend to talk about a feeling, you tend to talk about this notably subjective part. You talk about thinking, you tend to be focusing on analytic reasoning, which can be shared more generally. So it's simply those perspectives. And the other thing is, I think it's interesting, this gardening example. Obviously there was a reason. You were motivated by a reason to figure out the geometry of these things, but you simply went too far, and you have a lot of experience, not just personally, but bioevolutionary experience in solving such problems. You become very good at it now, and you can oversolve it. It's just like we like the flavor and have hunger for fats and sugars. It's all well and good until we're so good at getting them that suddenly we have to moderate that. The evolutionary process often does not give us moderate desires, but gives us extreme desires. And once we become really good at satisfying them, somehow, we have to moderate. All is not lost. Evolution created this intellect. Our intellectual feelings that some urge might be useless play a role. That's how we can, one of the many ways we can overcome those feelings. Now, if you are lining up these rows for some productive purpose, then you should simply realize with your intellect that at some point it was good enough and you're wasting your time. Unless you're doing it for another reason. I think that's what we're getting to. Now, if you're doing it for an artistic reason, or maybe to impress a gardener friend, look how straight the rows are, or just because it's your own personal aesthetic, which I'd consider basically an artistic reason, then you're doing this thing for yourself, for some, or for example, you might do that because it calms you, it's calming. But then if you're worrying so much about it that you start to feel like you're wasting your time, it didn't really calm you down. So you need to use your intellect to find out. And you should be able to stop worrying about how straight the rows are through an examination of your behavior and what you think your goals are, what you think your criteria are. If they're really just a productive criteria, then you need to truncate those. And it's not like you can't change those feelings. I mean, if you really are like, you know that you don't need to get them any straighter, but you're just driven to, that's an obsessive compulsion, right? If you can't stop it, you know, you might be doing it because it calms you down, but it's not calming you down. You might do it for artistic reasons, but you don't really care about the work in an artistic way. You might be doing it for all these reasons. You need to figure out if one of them really holds, and it'll be based on your subjective perspective, what you think and feel and perceive about that subject. And I think this way of thinking about this stuff sorts out a lot of these conundrums that you and others bring up. Because those are just false distinctions that confuse us. You know, even the action is just a perception, a feeling, and a thought. Even the action is just and the fact that we have memories of feelings prior to the feeling of the action, and see relationships between them. It's like, well, when you perceive yourself falling, and a moment later, you know, you're hitting the ground. Those are just actions that you've related to. That's just a series of actions. We relate and find these relationships. We think there's a pattern. This sort of perception leads to another one. But the causal relationship is always, much more of a controversial, debatable subject. And then subject to, ratios of this had a big influence, this had a smaller influence, and so on. So ultimately, it's just a series of feelings, including the feeling of some action happening, right? Now, you should, I think, be friendly to this model, because if you don't believe in will, then yeah, you're just perceiving your actions just like anything else. I believe in will, and yet I still call it a perception of. So this series of perceptions, we don't have to be trapped in a conundrum of, was the feeling right before the action its cause, or was the thought right before the feeling? No, they were all feelings and thoughts in series, including the action. The relationships between any of these feelings, thoughts, and perceptions and other feelings, thoughts, and perceptions, is something remaining to be analyzed and theorized about. And it's not something that's going to get a final answer, figuring out, or how close do you have to go to the action to get the feeling that's in the exact sequence, one thought before. But thoughts don't happen like that. Thoughts are like waves, they come and overlap and splash around. You don't have thought number one, thought number two, feeling, action. It's not like that. It's more like thought, feeling, and action, and a thought about it, and a feeling about the thought, and an action, and a feel. So, yeah, that's my take on that kind of subject. Very interesting stuff.